You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to episode 59 of Making Tracks. I'm your co-host Mark Newbold, and joining me today is a man who can see the future of Star Wars as clearly as an okey pokey who's cleaned his ears out. Mark, how you doing?
Sorry, I haven't cleaned my ears out for a couple of days, so I hardly heard that. I'm good. What the hell is an okey pokey?
An okey pokey, believe it or not, and I had to Google it because I didn't actually know the proper name. Is, you know, in Rise of Skywalker when you see those two little creatures with great big ears, but their eyes are in their ears, and you see the falcon fly over? They're called okey pokey, which just seems very English to me.
It does a little bit. That's because, you know, it could all be a little bit hokey pokey, I guess.
Well, exactly. You had a good week?
Week's been good. Just unboxed literally about 10 minutes ago my 501st ARC Trooper action figure set, and it looks beautiful, vintage collection. So, yeah, happy to put that into the collection. So, yeah, but apart from that, it's been good, been steady. How about you? How's your week in Star Wars been?
My week in Star Wars has been very good. Got some annotating done, as I say, so that's some little jobs out of the way there. And I also had the 501st set turn up as well. And some books to review. I've got some reviews coming at the site. The Lightsaber Collection review should be on fairly soon. And
nice.
Yeah, and there's some more podcasts coming this week. So we're out today. Canon Footer's out in a couple of days. There's movement. We've got a Planet Layer episode coming after a long break, which I think we're all looking forward to. And I know that the guys are working on Desert Planet. So there's lots of stuff going on at the moment. So it's all good. Let's kick off Razor Crest.
Yes.
The reason I mention your powers of sight is that last week on this show, we talked about the third sort of stretch goal for the Razor Crest, the HasLab Razor Crest. And you sort of put it out there and said, oh, maybe it could be. Well, I'll let you say what you said you thought it might be, because you were absolutely right.
I was. One of the rare times. I just thought it was quite a fairly easy reward, I should say, to put out. Carbonite blocks. And as we saw, 3 or 4 of them in the Razor Crest at the beginning of Chapter 1 of Mandalorian Season 1, I figured it would probably make a nice accompaniment to the actual vehicle. But once I was right, I'm sure any avid listeners of Making Tracks can go back over the last 8 or 9 months and listen to stuff I've got totally wrong, but this thing I did get right, so whoopee.
It was a good call. I mean, I think they'd sort of alluded that there were the little clips to hang the carbonite blocks on. So it's probably something that, well, it will have been something they'd have planned. I think any stretch goal that gets added, they will have designed it way out. And it's just like, well, that feels like an extravagance. So let's make that a stretch goal. Let's make that a stretch goal. So if you get to that 13,000 purchases, you get this carbonite block. And I know other HasLabs have had, I think, 4 stretch goals. This is the 3rd. So there might be another. I'd be surprised given the price point and the fact that we're not that far away now from reaching the end date of it. But nevertheless, you never know. I mean, okay, let's just put it out there then. If there was a 4th stretch goal, Mark, what do you think it might be?
Oh, damn it. I don't know. Thing is, at the moment, it seems like the stuff they've already built in. So, like you said, there's scope for it. So, probably would be something really similar like that. I mean, my question really is that actually, how many vehicles do you think they would sell if this wasn't a HasLab? If this was just a standard retail item? I mean, and this was one thing, this is one reason why I've kind of been hovering over the pre-order button for weeks now. I know you kind of jumped in fairly early on, but it's just like, are we going to get this? And then is there likely to be another Razor Crest in the not too distant future? Be it maybe something not necessarily as big, but still a Razor Crest. Because it seems like to do a vehicle that you've never done before, which is fine because I did that with a sail barge, and there's always been demand for that. There's always been a market for an ongoing new series to basically put out a fairly exclusive vehicle. It seems like it doesn't quite feel right. It feels like this probably should have been like a more commercially available vehicle to begin with. I don't know how many units they would expect to sell if it was just commercially available, even if it was at that price point, because no one's had this vehicle before. So there's going to be a fairly big demand for it.
Yeah, my head tells me that 2 things. I think one, Mandalorian as a concept, as a show, and as a IP within the wider Star Wars IP is red hot at the moment. So they've got the scope and the latitude to sort of do this because they know people are going to want it. But also, I think in the past they've released, for example, they released their Slave One way back when, and then they did a range of sort of, I can't think what they called them now, but they were bigger than mini rigs, but they were smaller versions of certain ships, and they put a Slave One into that range. Lego have done it. They do their great big UCS Falcon, and then they release Rise of Skywalker Falcon that's back to the old scale, So I don't think it means they couldn't release a Razor Crest down the line, but it wouldn't be a 2-foot-long beast like this one. It would be more of a regular sort of size, not completely to scale. So I think they've tried to make this as near to scale as they possibly can, haven't they? I think if they did a Razor Crest mainline ship, which I think they will if the show lasts another 2 or 3 years, I think it will happen, but I don't think it will happen with this particular design of it.
I'm hovering. I don't know how long I can carry on hovering over the pre-order button. Obviously, I've got to be aware that the deadline is looming, so it'd be one of those things of I might just have to just do it, and then I can spend the next 12 months trying to come up with an excuse to tell my girlfriend as to why I've just spunked 350 quid on a toy.
I'm in the same boat, mate.
Yeah, but hey, it's fine. It's collecting, and that's the thing. I remind her now and again, and to be fair, she's really supportive, and she doesn't actually, have an issue with my collecting habits at all. But I do remind her, collectors collect. We add stuff. We were buying stuff to then sell on. We wouldn't be collectors. We'd be traders.
Yes,
that's the thing you have to appreciate and take into consideration.
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zebralios, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the force be with you.
Dave Filoni was recently interviewed for a French website talking about season 2 of The Mandalorian, and whilst he obviously couldn't talk too much about what's coming, even though he was asked some very, very direct questions, he did drop a few hints and tips about what might be coming. One of the phrases that he used was that they are looking at season 2 of The Mandalorian to be a step up in terms of scope and scale as Empire was to Star Wars. Interesting phrase to use because it's quite evocative when you look at the scale of Empire compared to Star Wars. But he also mentions work starting on season 3 in November. And also out there floating around has been people asking Jon Favreau about whether or not The Mandalorian could at some point become a movie. There's a lot to unpack there, but just to kick off on the first bit, season 3, work starting on it fairly soon. Great news, isn't it?
Absolutely. Amazing news. And I think a boost for just the industry in general. This year has been horrible for everybody, including those working on film and TV series. So, yeah, he does go on to say about how the scale is going to be bigger. And, he mentions the fact that the stagecraft technology has evolved, which is great. As we mentioned previously, they've expanded it in terms of size and different locations to 3 or 4 different sites. But also, it's something which we touched on actually when we were reviewing the episodes. They're now going to be able to start to incorporate live action elements into that stagecraft environment, so they can actually put people into the backgrounds and kind of fill out the environments, because there were points when you kind of felt the environments were just a little bit sparse and lacking in life, really. So this is all good. It sounds like the evolution of the stagecraft technology is moving at a great pace. I can't wait to see what they do with it.
It sounds like they'd already sort of got production and design work starting on season 3 before or within a month or so of the first season launching. So like Lucasfilm traditionally have always been, especially back in the day, it was a 3-year journey to bring a Star Wars film from concept to completion sort of thing. And it feels like this is a similar process. Of course, it's television, not movies, but then, as we keep saying on the show, the line is blurred. It's another question. I think at some point you'll get to a scenario where you won't have a film production, you won't have a television production, you'll have content producers, and whether it goes on the big screen or whether it goes on the small screen, the writing and the editing will determine its structure in that sense, rather than we're making this for the big screen or we're making this for the small screen, because it just feels like quality and detail of movies to TV, there's barely any difference. You could if they said, let's release The Mandalorian first. We said this on another show recently, let's pack up the first 3 episodes of season 2 and stick them out on the big screen, like George did back in the day with the Clone Wars. Different parameters because that's animated and this is live. But you know what I'm getting at? They could do it if they wanted to.
They totally could do it. Yeah. There's a move now. I mean, everybody who's probably listening to this is quite comfortable with this term 4K now. 8K 8K is around the corner. There's TV companies who are now making 8K television sets and monitors and cameras and stuff. The whole post-production back end for that is still going to be really intense. But those kind of resolutions need bigger screens. So it does mean that actually relying, even from the consumer end, is starting to get blurred, especially at the moment with, cinemas closing temporarily to help keep COVID rates down. People are asking, like, do we still need cinemas, and can we not just get everything streamed to us? It depends upon where you sit with cinematic experience point of view. Are you going to see films and because you want to see them on the biggest screen and the most immersive place possible, or are you quite happy to just watch it at home on your TV? It kind of depends upon obviously the viewer and the public's perspectives, but it could be that we end up having a point whereby the cinemas are almost more exclusive rather than democratized as they are, so there may be less of them. You pay more money to go to see them, but then the actual experience that you get there, the level of comfort is increased. And we've kind of seen that even in London with the Odeon Lux, which is a Dolby Vision cinema, and that's like £40 or £50 a ticket. There's not a bad seat in the house, and the seats are really beautifully upholstered, and it's a real experience rather than it just being a kind of like you walk into a cinema and you're sat there with very little leg room and what have you. So that in itself is a whole different topic of conversation. But yeah, it makes sense. They must have known fairly early on with how the vibe was with Mandalorian season 1 that there's got to be 2 or 3 extra seasons in it. How far they go with it, obviously, it's going to be completely down to where the story goes. It could be 4 seasons, I've heard rumours of that, or it could be 7 or 8. It completely depends upon how much stagnation you get in the story, and also the desire for it from the fans as well, and how, most importantly, those Disney Plus subscription numbers.
I think also with movies and TV, certainly TV, when they did the Clone Wars animated, they had a 3-year gap of time to fill in. And one thing that they did very smartly was they kind of got away from the sort of the Star Trek way of 12 months of a viewer's viewing Star Trek Adventures was 12 months in the life of the characters. And I think that was probably as much to do with the actors aging as anything else. But they didn't really have to do that if they didn't want to. But then it didn't matter with Trek because there was no end point to fill in, unlike, let's say, Enterprise, which had specific time period to slot into. With Mandalorian, it's in a nice situation that it's sort of about 6 years after, half a dozen years after Return of the Jedi, but there's nothing in front of it other than, I think, Resistance would be the next thing, wouldn't it, really? They can have one season take place over the course of a week if they want it to, or they can have one season take place over the course of a year. It doesn't matter. And then we know Marvel have got comics coming, there's novels coming, there's other stuff coming out. There's things that are happening. They can fill in those gaps if they want to. It's not an issue with The Mandalorian in that sense. So, yeah, you're right. They could if they want to do 6, 7, 8 years, but it could take place over, I don't know. Look at Rise of Skywalker, and which is a year after Last Jedi and Force Awakens, which literally overlap. So they've got options there, haven't they?
I mean, I suppose it kind of comes down to how quickly or how much of a story point the aging of Baby Yoda actually plays into the narrative, because he's 50 now and he's still an infant. So does he suddenly have like a growth spur and we kind of see him grow up a little bit and is more kind of equivalent to like, I don't know, a 3 or 4 year old? I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be a linear spaced amount. I mean, you could almost have the end of season 2, for instance, and then season 3 is like if they jump 4 or 5 years in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if anybody stated how long a period the events of season 1 of The Mandalorian actually cover.
I don't know. I mean, my gut tells me season 1 from top to tail is, to me, it feels like a couple of 3 months, but it could well be a lot longer or a lot less.
It's like, how long does he spend on planet on chapter 4? Because
chapter 4,
that could have been a week, or it could have been like a couple of days. And it's hard to gauge with travel time, because Star Wars has this way of compressing travel time into jumping from one side of a galaxy to the other very quickly. Who knows? But it's exciting, and I can't wait for season 2, which is, we're counting down the days now.
And obviously we'll be talking about it here on the show, and we'll be reviewing it on the site as well.
Hi, this is Neil Scanman. You're listening to Fantha Tracks.
One other question that came out was a Mandalorian movie. Do you think it's too early to be considering that? Do you think it's just one of those things that maybe in the future we could if we want to, but right now let's focus on television?
I mean, it's definitely not something that I'm sure anybody in the production would say no to categorically. It's whether or not there's a story to tell at the point where you need to do it. It could be a really interesting way of capping off the whole Mandalorian story, for instance. But then at the same time, you don't necessarily want to close off your audience to saying you've basically got to have invested in the last 2 or 3 years of Mandalorian storytelling to get on board with this movie. So they still need to do it in a very general, easy access kind of way. But it's possible. Anything is. And I suppose, as we kind of see with these large corporations, one day they're all invested in movies, and then the next day it's going to be streaming, and then like a couple of years down the line they want to then refocus on movies and getting the studios back up and running. So I guess we have to wait and see, but I certainly wouldn't say no to it, and certainly wouldn't be something that I'd be complaining about or saying we don't need it, because I think we do need Star Wars in the cinema.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I think with Mando, just specifically on that character, it feels to me like if you do 4 or 5 years of a series, because I think they're going to want to keep bringing out new stuff. It's a new opening for books and comics. It's a new opening for merchandise. They'll want to find another Baby Yoda breakout character at some point somewhere else. You look at your original trilogy era and you've got your cast of characters and you kind of know who the main players are, and there's a group of people you can sort of play around with, and new characters come in and out, and increasingly in the Disney era, new characters come in and become more important, like a Dr. Aphra will come in, or characters like that. I think with this era, the Mandalorian era, that sort of half a decade on, these are the characters that we really know right now. There's characters in books like the Aftermath trilogy and stuff like that, but generally on screen there's these characters, and it feels to me like if they ever did a movie to wrap up the series, it feels like Mando would sort of break out of this storyline and then become part of the wider group of characters of the year. I don't know. It would be a bookend to the show rather than something like, well, before you watch season 6, you've got to watch the Mandalorian movie at cinemas. You know, it doesn't feel to me like that would be it.
No, exactly. There's scope because of where we are in the timeline. He could end up almost being like some kind of fulcrum type agent for General AF of Resistance. I mean, who knows? But you would think that possibly from a movie perspective, just to try and get a more wider general population viewing it, which, to be fair, I think a lot of people who aren't necessarily big Star Wars fans have been watching The Mandalorian. But you'd want to try and find a way to tie it even greater into the main Skywalker saga storyline, shall we say, be it from a character level or just from a galactic events perspective.
Fantha Tracks.
The news has arrived via Pablo Hidalgo's new book, Star Wars Fascinating Facts, that according to George Lucas, Luke Skywalker was essentially always destined to die during the 8th episode. Now, if Lucas had have written it and seen it through to its completion, it probably wouldn't have been called Last Jedi, because that was a title that Rian Johnson came up with. But that being said, the thought that Luke was going out in episode 8, whatever happened, is quite interesting to sort of delve into. So kicking it off, what do you think about that? Do you think it affects anything? Do you think it's an interesting snippet of information? It's the what if question, isn't it? You know, Lucas did his version of 7, 8 and 9. JJ did his versions. You know, Colin Trevorrow did a version of 9. There's loads of different versions of 7, 8 and 9 out there, but we've got what we've got. Do you think this has any bearing on anything, or is it just like an interesting snippet of info?
It's an interesting snippet of information. I do wonder if it would help some of the dissenters with Luke's storyline maybe take a second thought about it, for instance. But for me, if you had said to me, make one of your predictions for the sequel trilogy, I would have said that Luke would have died either at the end of episode 7, a la Obi-Wan Kenobi, or at the end of episode 8, because it's going to be their darkest hour. And in some respects, that's part of what The Last Jedi achieved. It was, what is a galaxy going to be like, and what is the freedom fighters, be it Resistance or the Rebels, what are they going to be like without Luke Skywalker as a figurehead for them, or as just a notion that actually there's good out in the galaxy and somebody who could come and save them and turn the fight around. I'd really love to get my hands on the treatments that Lucas wrote, however quickly or however well conceived they were by him. When you read the Bob Iger book, it kind of sounds like there was no mention of episode 7, or that he had started working on episode 7 until he had approached Disney to buy them, but then realised that he wasn't likely to get the same deal that he was hoping for, which was kind of a similar price that Disney paid for Pixar. And that was basically down to the fact that they didn't have any motion pictures in production. So kind of read like Lucas went back to Skywalker Ranch and started creating episodes 7, 8 and 9. or at least trying to put some structure to some ideas that obviously he's probably had. I think George probably would have easily after Return of the Jedi, or especially after prequels, had an idea of where, if he was going to kill Luke, who was going to do it, how he was going to do it, and what subsequent sequel episode it would happen in.
That reminds me of when the New Jedi Order was being worked on and Vector Prime was being written and planned, and there was news at the time of the meeting at the ranch with all the authors, and they said, we need a big character to kill off to really get people's attention, and they wanted it to be Luke, and Lucas said, no, I've got plans for Luke, and they killed Chewie off instead. But that whole thought of, I've got plans for Luke, well, what else did Lucas do with Luke after 99 when they were plotting out that massive storyline? Well, nothing really. The special editions had already happened. There was no other books or comics, or rather, certainly nothing else that Lucas was involved with other than the Clone Wars, and the prequel trilogy. You know what I mean? It makes you wonder whether or not even then, I mean, we know that it had the original story back in the day, wrote them down on his little legal notepads. So there was always notes and noodles for 7, 8, and 9 way back in the 70s before he'd really made the films. And he said when he made the prequel trilogy, Phantom Menace is sort of 30% of what I wanted, what I originally wrote down, and Attack of the Clones is about 50%, and Revenge of the Sith is about 70%, or whatever the percentages were. The further down the line he got, the closer to his notes they were, because he kind of knew where he wanted to take it. Yeah. And thinking of that logic, you wonder if he had worked out 7, 8, and 9. And, I think we've all heard the same, that he was quite a way into doing 7. And we've got an interview with Jonathan Rinsler coming up on Canon Fodder, and he talks about the making of the Force Awakens book that he was working on that got canned, how far down the line different things were. And that will definitely be one worth listening to. There's a trilogy, a George Lucas Star Wars trilogy that we'll never get because that's not the way history took it. But those storylines and thoughts and ideas are out there. And it's a bit like, his original treatment for the Star Wars that Dark Horse did the comic version of. I kind of think, wouldn't it be great if they could get hold of that and do a Marvel version of what Lucas's 7, 8, and 9 would be? As if the fandom needs more fuel to burn itself to bits. But, there you go.
Maybe there's something they could do in 10 or 15 years' time.
Yeah.
But, if you do it too soon, it's almost like what happened when people started reading and sharing the Colin Trevorrow scripts and treatments and stuff. It was too close to the release of Rise of Skywalker. And I think there's too many people who are still not particularly satisfied with the end of Rise of Skywalker. It kind of made it sound like everybody in fandom thought everything was a good idea that wasn't on screen, and everything that was in this Colin Trevorrow script was amazing.
You turn left, you turn right, you're walking into a flaming pyre of internet outrage, aren't you?
Yeah, you are, unfortunately. That's just like the nature of the internet and the echo chamber of social media these days, unfortunately. If they could realistically get those treatments and then do a Marvel comic series of them, that would be something really worth reading. Of course, the thing is there's still an artistic interpretation, and there's the interpretation from written word into a comic, which in itself has got its limitations as a medium. So you're not going to get like a true representation, but you would definitely be able to get the story beats across and find out what he wanted to do with the main characters. So that would definitely be interesting. Actually, the other day, I think it was Phil Sosak on Twitter.
Yeah.
He even retweeted, I think he retweeted Ryan Johnson, who just kind of found his notebooks from the Last Jedi production period. And I'll be curious to read those as well, because that would be something quite interesting just to kind of, find out, especially those early conversations and, the early notes and even necessarily the early kind of story points that he was coming up with.
Yeah.
I'd be interested just to see like how left of field he really went, because I'm sure like what we saw in Last Jedi is probably nowhere near as extreme as he probably could have gone with some things.
It feels like Luke as a character. You make a really good point in that you need, because it's a trilogy and it's Star Wars, you need the darker second episode to have something to fight back from in the finale, which certainly Rise of Skywalker did that in, like Jedi did it. There's similar beats on both of those. Revenge of the Sith is the anomaly because that just slides all the way down. Do you think not so much the fact that Luke died, the way that Luke died is the key to this sort of whole thought process? Because going out like Obi-Wan, knowing what he knew and allowing himself to die with the knowledge that there was a future ahead because of the mission he'd been on for 20 years or 19 years that we're going to see in the Kenobi series, partially, hopefully, that Luke standing up to Kylo to give Leia and everybody else time to escape, as we saw it in The Last Jedi, was one thing because that was a holding tactic, and also he was facing off with Kylo, and there's lots of little avenues you can explore there. How Lucas would have had Luke die, I'm very curious to think how Lucas would have played that out. Would it have been a face-to-face confrontation? Would he have died like Yoda died of old age? Would he have even been on Acto? There's lots of little thoughts, where could that have gone?
I mean, the comparison of Luke buying time for the Resistance is almost, in some respects, what Obi-Wan was doing on the Death Star.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take Obi-Wan out of that duel, for instance, ignore the fact that somebody else would have had to turn off the tractor beam, that would have just given Vader and those stormtroopers direct access to the Falcon hangar. There's a big chance that actually none of our heroes would have made it back on the Falcon because they would have been cut down by Vader.
Okay, here's an alternate thought then, and this is something that struck me a long time after I'd seen the film back in the day as a kid. We know stormtroopers are precise.
Yeah.
Ben says it in A New Hope when the Tuskens and the Jawas and all that stuff. And it's become almost a trope of stormtroopers being bad shots, and, it's the old 501st UKG joke, isn't it? But in truth, they weren't bad shots at all. And in Star Wars, they're almost shooting to miss because they've put the tracking beacon on the Falcon to lead them to Yavin. And that's become a thing. It almost feels like lazy writing because they've just took a line and took it verbatim.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas actually, if you think about it, that you got the Death Star from Rogue One and from everything else. We know they could have sent 1,000 TIE fighters after the Falcon, but they don't. They send 4. Oh, it's their sentry ships. What? For the whole Death Star, 4 TIE fighters, really? Yeah. And Leia says that was too easy. They're tracking us. She knows it. We know it. But if you know that going into watching Star Wars, the stormtroopers are never going to hit them. They're shooting to miss. They're on orders not to kill them. They're chasing them back to the ship so they can lead them back to Yavin. It's one of those weird little overthink. You can overthink things and it sucks the joy out of it. It's one of them, isn't it?
With respect to that, you only need one person to get on the Falcon and fly away.
True.
You only need one or two people to survive.
Very true.
There is a mirror kind of between what Luke did to what Kenobi did to a degree. A degree. I think it's something that's almost feels slightly overlooked in the Luke Skywalker story from Last Jedi because of how people kind of reacted to his reaction of receiving a lightsaber. But I think that whole notion of Luke cutting himself off of the Force is something that I think probably Lucas would have played with a little bit more. I don't think it was done as overtly as it probably could have been, and might have been something even more impactful. That, for me, is the stronger part of Luke's story on Acto, is that actually he's cut himself off of the Force. And maybe it's not necessarily a deliberate decision, but maybe it was something that happened because of the trauma of losing the whole Jedi Academy. It doesn't necessarily have to be an active, I'm going to go and hide here as such. Maybe he kind of was traumatized to a point whereby actually he found he wasn't able to touch the Force and then had to try and find a way to get back in contact with the Force. That would be my take on it. Because I kind of think that Lucas would have played with Luke becoming the Ben Kenobi character, even down to extremes of him being a hermit. That would be something that I could just see Lucas would probably have done based on how he kind of likes to mirror things from one trilogy to another. I
mean, the one thing I do like about Last Jedi is that Luke is a very reluctant teacher. Obi-Wan's waited and patiently waited, and the moment has kind of, in one way, organically come because Luke has had to come around to it because of the death of Owen and Beru. That was the big shove, more than anything, really. But of course, circumstances, Scarif has just happened, we now know, and all the other things that had happened, the plans have been stolen, and it's all in motion. And now Obi-Wan has been contacted, somebody's reached out to him, and it's happening now. It's like, now it's happening. So there's that in that Obi-Wan wants to train Luke, but he's preparing him, and obviously Empire, which is 3 years later, but Empire is the next nudge to lead him to Yoda, who fools around a bit because he wants to gauge Luke a little bit. He's only ever seen him from afar. It's going to happen, but there's not the reluctance. It's almost like he's got to earn it a little bit. Whereas with Last Jedi, when Rey comes to Luke, and Luke's very much like, you don't want to do this, I don't want to do this. It's not worth it. We've tried and it didn't work. And Rey has to kind of talk him around. But I like the fact that it wasn't just rock up and here's your lightsaber. And I mean, I'm still never going to be a fan of him chucking it over his shoulder the way he does. But the essence of what he's doing is, I don't want no part of this, man. And I like that process of, what he's thinking. And I just wonder where Lucas would have took it. Like you just said, would Lucas have had him be a hermit? Okay, Ben's a hermit on a desert planet because that's where Luke is. Ben didn't choose to go to Tatooine. It's where he was sent. Luke has chosen to go to Acto because it's as far away from anywhere as he can get. It's a bit like Camino. It's off the map. He knows he's pretty safe there and no one's going to bother him. And his own legacy within the Force means that the caretakers accept him and it's the safest place he can be. And also, you've got the Jedi tree, but you've also got that pit that Rey goes into for her sort of the mirrors and the vision stuff. So it feels like it's almost like a neutral part of the galaxy in terms of the Force, where he's, is the safest he can be, and just leave himself to rot away until destiny comes knocking on his door, like it kind of came knocking on Ben's door and Yoda's to a degree. But they knew it was coming. It was like they've played the longest game you can imagine, almost as long as Palpatine played getting the galaxy in his hands in the first place.
You could draw the parallel a little bit between Yoda's decision to go into exile, as we talked, I think, about last week or the week before, as being penance. Yeah. And that is very similar to what Luke did. One of the things that unfortunately really overshadows The Last Jedi, it's Luke's reaction to receiving the lightsaber. Yeah. I mean, he could have done 100 different things which the audience would have found a little bit more palatable, be it he just hands it back to her, ignites it, and then drops it, or throws it away like he does at the end of Return of the Jedi. So it's not like he hasn't thrown a lightsaber away. That's one thing in the defense. But because it kind of felt like it was played for laughs and maybe at the expense of the audience, bearing in mind you had sat on podcasts and I'd talked with loads of people before about what's going to happen with Luke and what's his reaction or his first words going to be. For that to happen, that was possibly a misjudgment based on a creative misjudgment, shall we say, and possibly one that kind of shows that at that point they weren't necessarily thinking about the fan base as such.
Anthony Daniels said it to Mark Hamill in Anthony's memoirs. Hamill was gutted that he'd worked out and got ready and all this stuff for Force Awakens, and he doesn't have a single line in it. But like he said, it's the longest lead up to a character's entrance in movie history. He literally turns up in the last minute. And that last minute, for me, he's finally returned, and there he is. And oh my God, I mean, I can still feel I got the shakes watching it the first time. And then to move ahead 2 years to Last Jedi, and we're back in that moment, with that great opening with Resistance base being attacked and all that opening sequence, which was great fun. And then go back to Acto, it was played so flippantly after such a momentous sort of final shot of Force Awakens. The film for me had a lot to come back from. Anyone who saw Empire after only seeing Star Wars would be like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. And that's a good thing, change it up and keep you on your toes, and all for that. I just wonder what Lucas would have done with Luke in Last Jedi, whether his death would have been through exertion, through conscious choice, through illness, through whatever it may be. I just wonder where Lucas would have took it.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
November 17th, we'll see the return of the Star Wars Holiday Special in a slightly different format, in the form of a brick, the Lego Star Wars Holiday Special. Some big names were announced this week for the show. Anthony Daniels, Billy D. Williams, Kelly Marie Tran, including a bunch of Clone Wars voice actors coming back as well. I'm really looking forward to this. It looks like it's going to be fun. What do you think? Even down to the poster with Luke's little brick hand.
I think the posters are really quite fun. I mean, from the stills images that I've seen, it looks great. There's a photo you've got on the site. It looks like prequel era Jedi with Mace Windu at the front taking on First Order troopers. Yeah. And half buried in the sand at the back, it looks like half of Darth Maul. So what the hell is going on there? I mean, there's pod racers in the background and a TIE fighter. I mean, it's like, I think this is going to be bonkers. And I tell you what, we should try and spend an episode, or maybe 2, or maybe 10, trying to figure out how this all fits into canon.
Yes. Can we?
Yes, let's try.
Let's do it.
Maybe
I love it.
It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun, and great to have Kelly Marie back, and Billy D. and Matt, and of course Anthony Daniels, who doesn't let a good droid lie, or should say good like 3PO part to anybody else. So it's all good fun. I can't wait till November 17th. I think this is going to be really fun.
I know Anthony has said before, one of the things he enjoys the most is doing those Lego animated shows, because he says it's still 3PO, but he can be a bit silly and just have a bit of fun, and it's just off the cuff. Droid Tales was fun, and Yoda Chronicles, and all that sort of stuff. So I know he enjoys that, and obviously he's back for this, and he's back for the Tales from Galaxy's Edge as well, the VR thing. So he's got a lot more 3PO in his future, I think. But coming back to this, Billy D being back, brilliant. And it looks like the Rise of Skywalker era Billy D, doesn't it? Or Lando, rather. There was one poster where you've got Rey versus Darth Vader, and already people on the internet are losing their minds, because if ever Rey beats Darth Vader, people will just lose it. Good grief. So I'm looking forward to that. Beautiful thing about the holiday special, it is so of its time. You've got all these bands, and Jefferson Starship, Diane Carroll, all these other people coming in and singing and doing goofy things, and it's like the most 70s thing ever, which Star Wars A New Hope is completely a 70s film. The others sort of step out of their time period, but Star Wars is very 70s. I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
And it'll be interesting to see what kind of satire commentary they put in for stuff. And like you said, if they channel the vibe of the holiday special by having different bands on or different references, I'll be interested to see what other pop culture references, or do they keep it completely in universe? I'm sure there's got to be at least a couple of Baby Yoda references. I mean, maybe even Baby Yoda meets Yoda. Well,
this is Lego Calendar is all based on this, isn't it?
Yes.
Lego Holiday Special. So you're going to get figures like this Poe Dameron in his Christmas jumper with little BB-8 on and stuff like that. Somebody noticed there's an older looking Wookiee, so they're thinking it might be Itchy.
I can't wait for it, and we should definitely spend some time to chomp over this one once it gets released.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll definitely be reviewing it on the site, but we'll talk about the Lego Star Wars Holiday Special and its unique connection to canon. None of this canon adjacent crap. This is the real thing. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for episode 59 of Making Tracks. But if you want to continue the conversation, and if you want to let us know maybe your thoughts and opinions as to what you think George Lucas may have done with episodes 7, 8 and 9, drop us an email. And to do that, Mark's going to tell you how you can get in touch.
Absolutely. You can send your emails in to radio@fanthatracks.com, so you can send in any queries or questions or thoughts or complaints or whatever else. We don't give refunds, I'm afraid. But send them into that email address and we'll talk about it on the show. We are looking for listeners' questions. We didn't get any this week, but hopefully some of you wonderful people will send some in for next week, and we will. We'll talk about anything, honestly. But if you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the Fantha Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. If you want to send in listeners' questions, email us radio@fanthatracks.com. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds @Fantha Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and we like 5-star reviews, please. Thank you very much. On Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fantha Tracks intro music, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Episode 59 is in the can. I've stuck it down with sticky tape and it's done. And we'll speak again next week, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Everybody take care and live long and prosper.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Cannon Fodder.